Welcome to Great Lean Leaders Making the Business Case. I'm Dr. Shannon Flummerfeld, and I'm pleased to have with us today Dr. Jessica Jannaman. She works for TE and has a very, very impressive background in health, safety, and sustainability. Jessica, you're going to talk a little bit about TE, but some of you may not know that they are one of the world's most admired companies for the work that they do and the results that they produce around safety, sustainability, and productivity. So welcome, Jessica. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Dr. Flumerfeld. Great to be here. Really excited for this initiative.
Wonderful. And Jessica, you and I have had many, many conversations about lean and lean leadership. We've had a chance to work together for a while as you were studying lean and lean leadership as well. But can we just back up? I want to take a look at understanding who you are, where you come from, what makes you tick. So can you give us a little background on what your actual current position and title are? What does that mean? And then have you been in the position long? And what got you interested to begin with in what we call HHS or health safety, or HSS, health safety and sustainability?
Sure. So I have been in manufacturing and automotive for a little over 13 years now. It's kind of daunting to even think. I know that may not seem like a lot to some, but it kind of seems like a lot to me, a little bit. But I first came into manufacturing and automotive. I started my career at ABB, and I guess that's really where my lean journey began, because I was very fortunate to have great managers, people surrounding me that were pushing and promoting lean. And it was one of those things that helped me become interested, right? So I started out my career in health and safety at ABB. I was coming in as a very junior person supporting a region and also supporting a site. And I had an individual come to me and come to my manager and say, hey, really think this would be value added because you can apply lean to really anything. And this person was somebody that had worked at Ford Motor Company and actually had worked on the line in the shop floor. And they had always been an advocate for safety. So this person had such a dynamic about them, which I thought was so cool. Because here you had somebody that had not had a safety background or anything, and they're promoting this this need for lean to be in safety. And so I went to a Michigan Lean Consortium conference in Traverse City, which is always great. But that was my first introduction to lean. And then once I kind of got a whiff of lean and understanding what it was, I was hooked. I was immediately hooked. I said, this can connect with anything, right? And so I took it back and started to apply it within safety and environmental and health. And it was comical because I still remember to this day, I had a project manager for a launch going on, and they had approached me because they were struggling over some things. And they said, hey, we heard you're a lean black belt. Can you come do some of this lean stuff over here and help fix the launch? And I was like, well, it doesn't exactly work that way, but maybe we can use some tools and understand that. And so again, one of the things I think it taught me initially and beginning my lean journey, when I think back about it, is you can apply this to all facets of your life. It doesn't matter what position, and it doesn't matter what function you're in, right? And so I took that, I went on to work for Chrysler or FCA, supported in a corporate position there. And then eventually went over to Dura Automotive Systems, where I led as the main contact in person for environmental health and safety. I was the head of safety, environmental health, and sustainability. We had a little over 42 sites globally in 13 different countries. And again, I started to get this ask, and how do we apply lean? How do we put this into our systems? And eventually transitioned over into quality, where I oversaw quality for our organization. And so that's a little bit about my background, and how lean's kind of followed me throughout my journey. And now coming into TE, I still continue to use these principles, right? And the one thing that I always reflect back on as lean leadership, um, it's about developing the team around you. It's about making sure that you are self-aware. You always have that self-awareness and you can recognize where the gaps are and where your own strengths and weaknesses are, because we really need to fill those as good leaders, right? And promote that talent and development. So that's a little bit about me and what I guess I philosophize or what I drive as a lean leader within an organization.
That's great. So you are right now at TE. Can you tell us, and I know you have global responsibilities,
Sure.
can you tell us a little bit about your current position and what that entails?
Yep. So currently I support one of our three segments. We're comprised of three different segments. One is automotive, one is communications, and what I support is the industrial solutions segment. This consists of a little under 60 plants globally. And we're in, I mean, TE is in a little over 130 different countries, and we've got almost 100,000 employees globally. But I support about 26,000 of those employees globally. And so safety and health is my primary responsibility, but I also support environmental and sustainability. And that could be anything and everything given the day. That's one of the things that I love about my function is that I'm always learning and it's never a dull moment. And sometimes those moments are great, sometimes they're not so great, but yeah, so that's really what I do. And my main job is to support those sites and work with them and connect with the leadership team.
That's great, Jessica. What a great career path you've had. So in the beginning, is there something that really attracted you to health and safety, sustainability, environmental impact, those issues? I believe your degree was studying that at the university, at Oakland University, if I remember correctly. And how did you actually become interested in this whole area? What started you on that pathway?
So I kind of fell into safety like a lot of people. And I
Doesn't
think
sound very safe if you fell into
yeah, it's not very, I felt safely in the safety.
it. Okay, good.
No, it's funny when you talk to safety people, we always say that we weren't really necessarily going into that career path. It's very rare that you find somebody that's, streamlined. And so really what I guess pulled me into safety, my background was environmental science for my undergrad, and then I went and got my master's in safety. But what I loved about safety is it's a career that you can continuously help people, right? It's 100% focused on people. It's dynamic. The path or the day to day changes over and over. There's lots of different explorations you can do with this career path, but it's really the people that work in safety that I feel like that have kept me engaged. And I think back to my first manager and mentor, and he was the head of ABB, like I spoke about. um, you know, Seeing him and having him mentor me and seeing how safety can really touch people's lives on a day-to-day basis. And that's critical, right? I think that's a very special thing that you're able to do if you're lucky enough to do it in your day-to-day job, right? So.
Yeah, so then if I were to ask you what makes you tick as a lean leader, is it the ability to help people? Is it something else, or that plus something else? Like, how do you view that? What are your drivers as a lean leader?
So my drives as a lean leader, I feel, and I was just having this conversation today with someone. I'm always focused on people, right? We have to invest in our people, personally, professionally. And given that I work in a large organization, in manufacturing, I feel that if, as a leader, you lose focus on that, that it will impact everything and anything else you do. So I always focus on people personally, professionally, how to develop people. That really makes me tick, so to speak. Making sure that people can go to work safely, come home safely, the same way they went to work. That really drives me. And so I'm very passionate about that because, the last thing anybody wants to do is go to work and get hurt, right? People aren't trying to get injured. So it's that personal touch. And when you see how the work connects with people at home, and it not only impacts them, but it impacts their family and their friends. To me, at the end of the day, that's worthwhile. I always say, where can I focus my efforts, right? And I feel like I can get the most juice for my squeeze out of helping people, right? And be successful in that role. So that really drives me. People, talent, development. Also, I think, we want to make sure that, I think almost, you talk about servant leadership. There's things bigger than ourselves to help support people, right? And so, really look, and I reflect and I remind myself on a day-to-day basis. There's more than just the going through the motions, right? But touching others and making sure that we can truly support the development of others. So.
No, that's really great. And like you say, you've got 26,000 people to to do that with. So you definitely have a very significant role, an important one as well. So can we go back to TE, your current where you are in your current position? And is TE on would you call it a lean journey? Is it, what is that like? Or have you been introducing lean to TE? And I just would like to know, how is all of that going? And, are there lessons learned that you could share with others? Because oftentimes lean leaders may be the actual lean champion, in their organization. And that can be difficult sometimes to get people interested and engaged. And I just wondered what that was like with you and with TE. And can you just tell us a little bit about what you have found that really works well for your organization?
Sure. So I think I've seen lean from two totally different extremes. When I worked at FCA, Chrysler Stellantis, now it's called, we had what's called world-class manufacturing, right? And that was a structure and a system put in place, and it's very regiment, it's very prescriptive. I call it lean on steroids, right? Because and anybody who's gone through a WCM audit, you can have one thing out of place and you get points down. Why? Because you've deviated from standard work, right? See, the other aspect, I've gone and been at other companies. I think TE is a little bit here, where we've got elements of it, we're utilizing it, we're putting it into different aspects, but we haven't really got it figured out yet, right? We do have a central organization, which is called TE, basically TEOA. It's Operational Achievement or Excellence. And so we've introduced some of the tools, but, and Dr. Flumerfellow, you know this, that you can apply the tools, but you may not capture culturally what, the lean journey requires, right? And so I feel like we're not 100% there. And so a lot of times what I will do, especially in my function, is, I'll be sitting and listening to a conversation, and I do try to introduce some tools, but I feel that where the most impact becomes is when I'll be on conversations or meetings or so forth, and I'll just kind of stop and I'll recalibrate and I'll say, guys, what are we trying to achieve here? Are we going down a different path than what we intended? And that's where I feel like you can interject some of the tools, right? To recalibrate people. And so, I'll use those, whether it's Kaizen events. One of the most common ones from a tool standpoint, everybody wants to be safe when using forklifts, right? It's a big push for us, powered industrial vehicles. And I'll go into plants many of times and we'll talk about forklift safety. And I'll have materials managers say, well, we need forklifts and we have to do this. And I say, I understand that, guys. Believe me, I've been in operations. I understand that we need forklifts, but have you actually done the spaghetti diagram? Have you actually done the value stream map, a plan for every part? Right? And let's just stop and think about this for a minute. And have we done this to help us in achieving what we're trying to achieve, which is at the end of the day, we want to be safe, effective, efficient, and do it in the most lean way possible, right? And so there's a lot of those types of conversations I think that go on, which is integrating lean with safety. It's integrating lean with operations. But it's as a leader, you have to stop and I guess guide the team. Hey, what are we actually trying to do here? So
Yeah, and I mean, I think any advocate would say that lean begins with thinking, right? Rather than the actual tool deployments. You have to get that thinking right. And just to stop and think is a big deal. There's a lot of environments where it is not acceptable to stop and think and figure out what are we doing and what are the what's really the problem here that we're trying to solve and what are we trying to achieve and so on. All of that can just get lost in the daily bustle. So that's really great that you're causing that reflection. And that, of course, is foundational for the continuous improvement cycle, is to have that reflective piece. So thanks for sharing that. If you mentioned the previous Ford employee at ABB who had gotten you thinking about lean and so on, but are there any other like critical events or opportunities or issues that were presented to you that then you started to comprehend and understand as a lean leader what it might mean to actually apply lean and help your organization, your people, and the project that's at hand?
yeah, so one thing that comes to mind, when I had started at Durr Automotive, I was very green into this role. I think I maybe had 7 years of experience and I was put into a regional leadership position. And I had a very good manager who is actually a retired vice president of Ford, ironically enough. And he had enough courage to give me a chance, right? And say, I don't know if he saw something in me or what it might have been, but he said, safety, you get that. You've worked in launches, you've worked in plants, you understand this. Now you're going to be overseeing, I think it was 13 sites at the time, right? And I said, okay. And I went back and I reflected, and much like with lean, you try to develop what's the current state, right? You don't want to come in and just force things on people. You want to engage people. You want to make sure they're a part of whatever needs to be improved. And so one of the activities that I did is I did a SWOT analysis. I did a SWOT applying the lean tool. And I said very simplistically, I went to each site and I said, guys, we're going to break down our management system into different aspects. And if you look at it, it's consisting of leadership, training, resources, and ISO 45001 is a safety management system that guides along those principles and those elements. So I had each plant go out and do a SWOT analysis. And one of the things that I thought was so powerful about this is, the team was not hesitant. They were very much into, let's talk about what we love, what we would do different, what we would change. And I took that feedback and I consolidated it. And then I did the same activity, and this is all focused on safety. I did the exact same activity at the director level and at the executive level. And what was interesting to me is there was such a disconnect in those three different levels. as to what the strengths, the opportunities, the weaknesses, and the threats were. And I published that. I got everybody together and I said, here's what everybody said, right? And I presented this to my COO, and my COO said, well, I don't want you to just do this for your region. I want you to do this globally now so we can understand. I went, okay, sure, not a problem. I'm always up for a challenge. So I did this through the remaining, 20, 30 something sites, got the feedback, and that really helped us to set the strategy, and say, okay, now what do we have to prioritize? What from a regulatory standpoint, what from a cultural standpoint, from a process standpoint is going to help us the most? And so, and not only that, but it culturally shifted us because we were now talking, and we were talking at multiple levels in the organization. So for me, that's one thing that really sticks out in my mind, and that eventually led me into the director role and reporting to my COO, who I've been extremely grateful that I've had such great leaders and mentors throughout my career. And my COO was one of those. And he was somebody who taught me primarily to put people first, or put personal things first. And it's interesting because I was always I'm very driven. I'm very, okay, we've got an hour to get this accomplished. Let's go in. And I remember I would have weekly discussions with him, or sometimes bi-weekly or monthly, depending on travel and everything else. And I was like, okay, I've got these 20 things that we got to get through, right? And I would talk, and he would stop from when I first walked in the room and go, how are you? How are you doing? How's your husband? How's your dogs? And I'm like, no, we have these 20 items we have to get through. You don't understand, right? But he taught me that personal touch element, right? And so in safety, we, of course, I wouldn't be in this career if we didn't care about people. But he taught me that there's a personal element to everything that you do, right? And so, yeah, transitioning from using a lean tool to help, lead this strategy and process for an organization, which eventually led me to another great mentor and leader. And then developing those soft skills, I guess, as I grew in the organization, and learning more of those soft skills development, which I think has really kind of propelled me to where I'm at currently today. So, yeah, just very grateful. So.
Great. That's great. So, many people in leadership positions, especially I think lean leadership, are very, very tuned into the people aspect. And so I wanted to ask you specifically about your views on mentoring others and then being mentored, even in your current position. You're at quite a high level in the organization with large responsibilities. Do you still seek mentorship? What might that look like? Or are you mentoring others, and what might that look like?
Huge advocate for mentoring. I actually make it a requirement for our people in our organization. And the reason is, not only is it an aspect for you to get to understand your people, and have that connection, but you need to be constantly learning and developing. That personal professional development can never stop. I didn't go get a doctorate because I wanted the name. I went, and I wish I could actually continue my doctorate without achieving it. Sounds crazy, but I love the classes, like at Oakland, where you and others, where it was pushing me to learn, pushing me to continue and extend. And that's where I think with mentorship, you have to have somebody that is asking you questions and, saying, where do you want to be? How do you want to grow? Talk to me about your challenges, right? And you need that opportunity to have those discussions. And I currently mentor quite a few people in and outside of our organization. And it also helps me learn and grow, because when you are a mentor, it's also giving you some challenges and things that you might have to solve, and you're helping someone else solve that where maybe you haven't had that issue before. So, yeah, I think it's critical. If you're gonna, at any level in the organization, you should have a mentor, and you should be mentoring as well. So,
Yeah, and I think that's great to mention, like the reciprocity that exists in both mentoring and being mentored. There is reciprocity for all parties involved. There's so much for everyone to learn and think about. And so it's just hard to see a downside to it in my view. And I know you've just been so effective at that. So thank you for sharing those insights with us on that. So Jessica, you've described your evolution over a period of time. The shocking number of years that you've worked, and um, and as how you have developed and grown from those. Was there like a point in your career development and your leadership development where it was a decision that you made, like, I'm going to start applying lean and, learn to become a lean leader? Or was it more of a journey for you as you went through that? Were there any key things that spurred that, or did it all just kind of accumulate, and then, when you started to look at lean, it made sense? How would you describe that pathway for yourself?
so I would describe it more of a journey. I don't think there's a single aha moment that comes to mind. And I think it's about, I almost look at it as like a puzzle, right? Where do the things fit along the journey? Because and that's part of the greatness of acquiring knowledge and experience with certain tools and understanding. But you figure out where the piece fits at the right time. And so I think as you go through a journey of lean, and like I said, I think you can apply it pretty much anywhere, right? And so for me, it was, what piece do I need for this puzzle right now? And that's through problem solving, creativity. You can apply the same skills over and over again, but in different situations. Um, maybe there is a little bit of an aha moment when I took on quality, and my COO, another COO that I reported to, who was another great mentor and influence to me. But he convinced me. He had to sell me on the idea of going into quality, and I said, I don't know anything about quality. I've worked in environmental health and safety my whole career. What are you doing? And him and my COO actually had to sell me on this concept, and I went, okay, I'm really taking a jump here. And not only was I overseeing quality for one or two or sites, I was overseeing quality for an organization, right? So I was very hesitant, and they had a lot of confidence in me, and they said, no, you can do this. So I got into quality, and I started to have these issues present themselves. I said, this is a lot like safety. This is a lot like, it was a bit of this aha moment, because I could apply the exact same tools that I had taken, whether it was Kaizen activities or if it was something doing a 5Y, all the same tools that we use within safety. And I feel like if you're a strong enough leader in situations, it's more about leveraging the talent around you and guiding them, right? And having the ability to facilitate them. And I do apply a lot of lean leadership or leadership standard work in my day-to-day. And I feel that does truly help in facilitating, doesn't matter what team. But that was kind of my aha moment. I remember going back to my CEO and my COO and going, this is a lot like safety, right? But recognizing it's not, it wasn't necessarily safety. It was more about the tools that I was using and the principles from the lean leadership skills and, facilitating teams, right? So that was a little bit of an aha for me, I guess. So.
Well, good. That's interesting. It's maybe what you call a hybrid, right? A few ahas along the way and then just continuing at it. So
Yeah.
that's great. And you've mentioned, the focus on people as one of your key philosophies as a lean leader. Are there any other philosophies? I mean, when I say philosophy, this would be like a tenet or a theory or a mind map, or a mental model that you use to approach your work as a lean leader, and that you find gets good results in terms of followers. And do you have any examples of this that you could share with us? And maybe when you really noticed, if this is a driving philosophy for me, I see a big impact. Or maybe something hasn't stuck out to you and it's just everything everything about lean that works. So can you share with us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, like I mentioned, people is the primary factor. I feel if you can invest in your people, develop the talent, the resources around you, that's the most critical. And I've learned also to make sure you have the right people on the bus in the right seat. That's not my quote, but that is huge. So anytime I've come into an organization or into a function, the first thing that I will do is get to know my people and get to understand what their strengths are and what maybe their opportunities are, right? And have those conversations with them. And so that's first and foremost. And I can remember being asked to help support as a plant manager in a couple different scenarios. And first thing I would do is make sure I have the right people on the bus in the right seats and that all the seats are filled. And so that's a one thing when I talk about people and making sure that they're taken care of first, that there's a calibration there, that there's a conversation that happens. The other piece is I always try to lead with positivity. And there's always things that can be worse. There's always things that can, even when it seems like it's the worst of the worst, right? But part of being a leader, I feel, is you've got to take some of that grunt, some of that hit, to make sure that your people are not feeling that, so to speak. And that comes with reflecting on ways to digest that yourself, right? Because it's hard sometimes being in a leadership position and having to take a lot of this, but you want to protect your people so that they don't see that same type of impact. But I think positivity goes a long way. And it's a mindset. It's a different mindset that you have to program and you have to practice. It's not easy. And a good way to think about this is I remember going into plants and I've had sites all over the world. They know me as the safety person. And I remember at Chrysler, it was comical because I'd walk in the plant and you'd have the operators going whoop, 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 because they were trying to let people know the safety police are here, right? And you would hear it all the way down the assembly line. And I went, okay, yeah, funny guys, right? But what I had a little bit of a reflection one day, and I was walking throughout a plant, and I said, I see people doing the head, shoulders, knees, and toes, making sure they got their safety glasses on, their seat belts on, and everything else. And I said, why does everybody, look at safety? They're viewing it as a negative. This should be a positive. Safety is a positive thing. So rather than, trying to build this rapport with everybody in the plants, rather than, hey, put your safety glasses on, make sure you're wearing your seatbelt, I went up and I started thanking people that I saw that were doing things right. And I said, hey, and I would scare people too, because I'd walk up to them and they're like, I got all my, what am I doing wrong? I would go, hey, no, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for wearing all your PPE today. Thank you for wearing your seatbelt. I appreciate you being safe and, protecting others too. You don't realize that you're helping others and keeping others safe as well. So I'm very much an advocate for that positive philosophy and lead with positivity, because you can shift the paradigm of an organization, of a plant, of a person, and really influence them by trying to live throughout. And it does. It takes work, it takes effort to think that way. But I think it's something that I do try to lead with.
That's really great. Thanks for the examples too. It brings it to home because I think we can all relate to the whoop whoop and and how are we going to do a workaround with with minimal attention and then do the PR thing when we need to. And that's really not at all what lean is about. It's a very authentic way to work and I think you did a great job modeling what that looked like. So, you mentioned your SWOT analysis that you did at different levels, and that was a very helpful tool and, provided a lot of information and strategic direction for your company at the time. Are there any other tools besides the SWOT analysis that you find are kind of like your go-to tools that work well for you? And I mean, like you say, some days are a crisis and, real stressful, a lot to do, and other days are more routine where you're working more on like a kata or a, routinized way of going about your work. So can you tell us a little bit about your preferred lean tools?
Yeah, so I think one thing, any position I've come into outside of just initially getting to know the people, and getting a current state is how do you improve? How do you improve situations? And for me, communication is always one of those critical things. And I feel that with communication, there is a standard model that you can apply using lean tools to do that. And a very simple example is coming into Dura, coming into TE, recognizing we didn't have any standard ways to communicate our KPIs or our key performance indicators or our leading indicators, right? And so one of the things that I sought out to do, and it was funny, I remember my VP of ops, when I went to him, I said, "Who's our communications person?" And they said, "Why do you want to know that? You're a safety person." I said, "Well, I just want to know. I want to get their feedback and insight." And he went, "Well, that's kind of dumb." Well, don't worry about it, boss. I mean, he would always give me a hard time. But and 4 months later, I came back with a standard communication board. It was an andon, right? Hey guys, we're either red or we're green. And here's the standard model. I had it translated to 13 different languages, and said, everybody's going to communicate in the same way with the same information. And that's going to help us. That's going to help us in driving the message that we want it all the way from the top leadership level down to the shop floor. Right. And I remember him coming back to me, he goes, "Oh, now I know what you were trying to do. Okay, yeah, I get it now." Right. Like but I think when we look to use tools like Andon or even SPC or radar charts or anything like that, which I would associate with data collection and lean tools and how you might communicate that, um, that is extremely effective. Communication removes ambiguity, and that's something I think as a lean leader that we've got to be able to do. We've got to be able to be very clear, very transparent, and make sure everybody understands the goal and what we're trying to achieve, whether it's safety, quality, or anything else. And so I guess that's, standard work would be one piece of it. And Don's leveraging data in different ways. There's lots of different tools that you can use, right, to provide that, but make it simple enough to where it doesn't matter what level in the organization, you're being effective in what you want to communicate.
Okay, that's great. I think that's really good advice. And like you say, the power of visual management, what we find in the lean tools and the graphic analysis and so on is, I mean, it's a picture's worth a thousand words, as they say.
Yeah.
So I think that's really great advice. Can you share with us your thoughts on what is known as Hoshin Conry and Lean, which includes strategic planning and management? A lot of organizations spend tons of time developing a strategic plan and then promptly forget about it and go around and go about their daily work. In Lean, when we do Hoshin Conry, it's driven by True North. And, we set our KPIs or OKRs or goals or whatever you might want to call them, breakthrough objectives. And then we drive our daily work around that, and that has to be managed. So, some organizations approach strategic planning in different ways, or maybe not at all. Some have longer cycles, for strategic planning. Others have shorter cycles. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you view Hoshin Conry and the work that you do?
So I think Hoshin Connery can be a very powerful tool. I think it can be a great way, like you said, to point us back to a true north. Like I said, for me, I always sit back. I'll sit in meetings and I'll say, guys, what are we trying to achieve here? Right. And I think Hoshin Connery does a good job of that, because it helps remind you, are what we do is what we're doing actually contributing to what we're trying to achieve, right? And so it kind of helps you level set. It also helps you ground you. So I do think it's very powerful. I've seen it at different organizations, and I've seen ones where Hoshin Connery is already in place, and it's been developed and it's ongoing, and you're reviewing it on a consistent basis, and you're level setting it maybe annually or every 6 months and whatever the frequency. I will be honest, I tried to take it to my team at TE and within my group, and I had a hard flat, I fell flat on my face, because I recognized these guys are not ready for it in this degree. And I had to do a lot of coaching and say, here guys, let's lead down that, because Hoshin Connery, it's a philosophy, it's a way of practice, it's how you do it. And I think you have to be at the right level and the right time in the organization to make sure that it's effective, right? And I think also it can be extremely powerful, and you can be very successful at it if you're ready for it, if your organization's ready for it. But I've been in different scenarios and cases where some teams are and some teams are not, right? But it doesn't mean that you should just forget about it. You always want to try to integrate and continuously and drive, and I think you can kind of feel it, right, with your team. Okay, we're ready now, right? So we're still not quite there, but we're getting there. So
Well, that's good. And I also think, like you say, it's different. The way I view TE is, there's tons of innovation cycles going on, of, new product development, new solutions, increasing connectivity, and, providing, solar solutions and all those kinds of things, right, that you guys do. So you've got those innovation cycles, which can be very short, in a competitive marketplace. So sometimes thinking strategically can seem like a mismatch in those environments. But like you say, there's a lot of power in sharing the vision, giving people some meaning to their daily work and so on. So there's a bigger picture there that, like you say, Hoshin Conry can be very, very, very good for an organization, regardless of what your cycle is like for that. So just can't do a lean leadership interview, Jessica, without talking about continuous improvement. So the plan, do, check, adjust cycle, is critical for any work that's done in lean. It helps us to identify waste, understand our customer, really understand the problem, set up some target conditions, and then do that reflection and that check and adjust as things are getting piloted and tested. And then we move through improvement that way. So that cycle represents continuous improvement thinking. And in lean, we do use an A3 sometimes, and the A3 document, takes many, many different formats. Depends on if you're planning strategically or, what you're trying to do. It can look a little bit different, but basically the underlying issue is it's representing that continuous improvement cycle. So can you share with us how you use continuous improvement thinking? And, do you actually use A3s at all, or is it more of a cultural and thinking routine that you're engaging in? I mean, the A3 tells the story, it's the documentation,
Yeah.
so it's a powerful communication tool. But I just wonder how you're using that, if at all, at TE.
Yeah, so we use it in a lot of different varieties. I know within health and safety, we use it all the time. Because we have to be able to take an incident, for example, and very directly and very briefly describe how that incident happened, right? So we'll use A3 formats and talking about, here's the root cause, here's what we identified, the team, the solution, how we're measuring it, right? And so we're living and breathing it day to day, and that's more on the lagging side of it. But from the leading side of it, we live and breathe continuous improvement, and that PDCA, or plan, do, check, act, and adjust. Because safety, if we don't live and breathe by it, we will fail by it. So what I mean by that is, you've got to, I always start with, you have to have a process or a policy and procedure. That's your plan. You have to actually execute it. And a lot of time that's through standard tools, defining those standard tools and making sure that you're developing and everybody's clear on the direction they're going. The checking. So this is where we audit. I know everybody says, oh, safety people love audits, right? Not necessarily true, but we have to do them, right? We have to see if our plan is working and if things are effective, right? And then the adjust and act, we have to, and this is where I think people struggle the most. It doesn't matter if it's safety, if it's quality or anything. We tend to just keep on pushing, right? Without going back and saying, and reflect. Take a minute to reflect and say, what would we do different? What needs to change, right? And my boss today just mentioned that phrase, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? It's ironic because we were just in a conversation with that today. But it's true, right? And if you don't use that last part of the acting or adjusting, you're just going to continue to push and expect different results. You're going to continue to go down the same path without it actually moving you forward. So we use management systems to help us with that. I think it's good to benchmark, but you have to, like I said, that most critical piece is the communication element. And I think A3 is that effective communication element. And it helps you to do that. So we are using it in a lot of different ways at TE.
Great, thank you. You mentioned the benchmarking and so on, and you had talked previously about some examples of, the KPIs and, getting your team engaged in those. So, do you feel that, the OKRs, objective key and key results, objectives and key results, or the key performance indicators of KPIs, the goals, the benchmarking, whatever we might use at, does that work well with lean? And do you have anything else you'd like to add around your experiences with using those for, better clarity and, assistance in problem solving and keeping things focused in the right way? Is there anything else you'd like to add around that topic?
Yeah, so it reminds me of an activity that I did at my last company. And I give a lot of credit to my bosses, or my team facilitators, as they prefer me call them, in previous organizations, because they've put me into projects or different situations to help resolve things at different points in times. And I'll never forget, I was in charge of this one activity for our strategic planning initiative, and it was our business plan deployment. And he wanted me to lead these senior executives through this activity. And he goes, I think you're one of the only strong enough people that can do this. that can actually lead us through this. You challenge people in the right way. And I'm sitting here thinking they're all going to hate me because, I'm 15, 20 years their junior, and here I am leading this session and pushing them to get to these strategic planning initiatives, right? And I thought he was bonkers for doing it, but I kind of saw what he meant. So I remember going down this path, and we had probably about 7 or 8 different functions in his direct reports. It was quality, it was materials, it was finance, and we followed the standard process, which is it wasn't just let's figure out what are our KPIs. It was what's the data we have to leverage to point us in the right direction. So it was a lot of data gathering. And then it was a lot of well, what are we really trying to accomplish here again? And what's really going to impact us as an organization? So I was going through this, focusing on the right things for the right reasons, right? And it was comical because I use this as an activity to not only, develop our KPIs, but I wanted to use it as a communication and a learning activity, because this team did not always talk to one another. They were not good at sharing data or information. They struggled, they fought over things. And so I had them go through and read a book together, which was the 4 disciplines of execution and identifying wildly important goals, right? WIGs, and connecting the dots between KPIs and leading indicators. And, and they had some of these, oh, this is what the book meant when they, but it was, to me, again, it's more about you've got to go down the process. You have to have the journey. A lot of times we want to jump to this is the right KPI without doing the homework behind it, without doing the gathering all the data and having the conversation collectively as a team to understand. Because I think that's one of the downfalls. You have functions that are working in their own little silo. They're talking about what they think is important, but they didn't talk to this other function, right? And so they'll develop KPIs, they'll develop leading indicators that really are not going to jive together. They're not going to flow together. And you do need collaborative efforts between the two. So with using Lean to develop those types of learning sessions, 2, mapping out, process mapping and developing that. It was a lot of, let's put a ton of sticky notes up on the wall, right? And figure out where this data belongs and how it belongs and so forth, for us to get to that point. And it took a good few months to have that. And it was very painful, I think, for this team, not only to go through the process and apply the tools, but to, collectively come together and start talking when they had not had those conversations. So that's just what comes to mind when you ask about that. But
Yeah, no, that's a great example, because it's like you say, it's not just a matter of plucking, a goal or a KPI or a WIG out of the air or off of like the bottom line on the profit statement. I mean, it's a lot more than that if you want it to be relevant and really driving. And however, if you can take, lead your team through that process, it can be very, very compelling. When you think about overall all of your leadership practice and experiences, what you've done, would you say that you have yourself systematized your own leadership work fairly well, or do you have it to a point where you kind of have your feet under you and like this is a good way to approach this? And then also, I know you talked a lot about standardizing of lots of things here throughout this conversation today. And so then in turn, I wanted to ask you a related question about leader standard work, which is how you get things to sustain after you've gone through, the improvement process of 5S. So how systematized is your own leadership work? That's like an internal thing about what you do with your work, how you approach it, and then how do you make sure that things do remain standardized and sustained through leader standard work? Can you just tell us a little bit about your experiences there, and what impacts you think it might make or not?
Sure. So whenever I'm working on a project, or if an idea or concept comes up, I try to put myself in everybody's shoes it's going to impact. And I think that's how systemically I do operate. I try to connect all the dots. And, so when I'm asked to deliver something, by my leadership team, or from, we see there's an issue in the organization, I always try to think back and say, how do we do this? How do we connect these dots? And I know we're going to have to go out and gather information and ask for feedback at multiple levels. But I think you can apply that model, that recipe, to anything that you do. And so from a systemic approach as a leader, I think we all have to think in that mindset. If at the end of the day, we're expecting people to do something, how can we make sure they're successful? How do we set them up for success and deliver what we want to achieve? And a good example of that, I came into TE, we were focused on near hits and or near misses, which is basically, it's kind of a leading indicator where something happened, but it didn't injure somebody in safety. So we really wanted to gather this information, but we really didn't have a systemic approach as to how we were going to take that from the floor level and lead it up into the organization. So my head started, the wheels are turning, and I'm thinking, what does an operator have to do at a ground level to do this? What do we have to influence this operator at a ground level to do? And so putting myself in their shoes, then, okay, at a management level in the plant, how are they going to take that information and flow it up? And then how do I communicate that to my leadership, right? So I think there is a systemic approach by putting yourself into people's shoes and making sure that you're always thinking about it from that output. The other thing that I'll say, when we talk about standard work, and a good example of this is, I mentioned communication being so foundational and critical. And so I actually developed a communication plan. Here's the types of communications, how we're going to communicate, who to communicate to. And I think that's a strong way that you can apply a lot of different things. And I think you've got to identify what are we really trying to focus on. So whether it's communication, if it's goals, and taking that and writing out your plan, right? I think a lot of times we have ideas and concepts, but we never put pen to paper and communicate that structure, right? So no pun intended, because I know I'm focusing on communication here, but it's a way for you to effectively translate what you're trying to accomplish, right? And so by you putting pen to paper on your standard work, and you're helping to tell your team and everybody, this is what I'm doing, right? And this is how I'm going to do it. So I live and breathe by standardized work, maybe a little too much sometimes. But I think it's powerful because everybody's on the same page. Teams know where they have to be. They know what they have to focus on. And even in our meetings, right? Guys, we're going to use the standard template to communicate. I want you to use some creativity, but don't deviate. At a minimum, it's got to have these things, right? And so I think that's and even if you look at the book, when Mullally, American Icon, right? That was one thing that he leveraged, was that standard work. Hey, as a team, we're all going to communicate this one page, or this one set of slides or decks, and this is how we're going to operate. And that's a part of our standard work as a leadership team. But you have to identify where it makes sense, right? And how to apply it effectively.
No, I think that's really good. And, the ability to be empathic, have really high emotional intelligence is a lot of what you're describing, around this approach to leader standard work and systemization of your own work. So it's interesting because, you think it would be very much about the regimentation and the routine of it all. And it is partly, but it's not driven by that. It's about value added design approaches, design thinking, walking in the shoes of your employees and so on. So that's all really an interesting explanation of that, Jessica. Well, we're just about ready to wrap up your round one interview. Is there anything else you'd like to add from our discussion today?
Um, just trying to think. I mean, you know, I think one of the biggest things for me is about continuous learning. So, and development of ourselves and never, it doesn't matter if I'm talking to somebody that works as an operator out on the manufacturing floor or, at a director level or talking, to my managers and so forth, but just want to emphasize the importance of that and how we all need to continuously learn and develop. And so hopefully some of this has helped in doing that, or at least inspired a little bit to do that, and continue to grow. But just want to thank you for the opportunity. So,
Well, thank you. I'm sure there's lots to think about here. I know, and having a chance to speak with you today, Jessica, has been really helpful to me, and I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy it as well. Everyone, Dr. Jessica Jannaman from TE. Thank you, Jessica, and we appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. I'll see you in round two.
all right, thanks. Look forward.